right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second installment of Civic Engagement 101. This is a series brought to you by Lawrence Public Library and the League of Women Voters of Lawrence and Douglas County. So we are kicking it off tonight. We're focusing on the census and how important it is to all of our communities. And we're especially excited to have two people from the Census Bureau here. I'm really excited to have them. What we'll do is I will go ahead and start off the introductions, and then pass it to Denise from the League, and she will continue, and then we will lead into it. So if you have questions, you're welcome to put them into the Q&A, but we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So just so you know, get them in your brain, and then we'll hit them later. So again, my name is Kate Gramlich, and I'm from the library. And tonight, one of the presenters is Coralys M. Ruiz, who is the tribal media specialist for the Denver region and the media specialist for Utah in the U.S. Census Bureau. Her main goal is to educate the population about the importance of the 2020 census and motivate them to complete the census. Ms. Ruiz earned her bachelor's degree at the Universidad del Sagrado Corazón in Puerto Rico and has a certificate in project management from Syracuse University in New York. She is a born and raised Puerto Rican, a mom, a military spouse, and a passionate public servant. We're glad to have her here. Denise?
Yes, I'm happy to welcome Maria here with us tonight. Maria Boyd is the Tribal Partnership Specialist overseeing Kansas tribes, their nonprofits, and tribal businesses in the state. She recently acquired additional responsibility of Oklahoma tribal entities as well. As the tribal specialist with the shortest tenure, she was appointed to data entry team lead and now oversees all tribal data for the Denver-Dallas region. Maria is enrolled Menominee from Wisconsin who came to Lawrence for educational endeavors and, in her words, never left. Maria has obtained a Bachelor of Business Administration from Haskell Indian Nations University and continued for a Professional Science Master's from the University of Kansas. Maria resigned from a full-time position with the Kansas City Indian Center to take this temporary census job. In doing so, she hopes to leave a lasting impression on tribal governments by being as transparent and inclusive as possible. Census participation is imperative to tribal governance, and if not taken seriously, can become a detriment. She's not only an advocate for the census, she is also an advocate for education, and we're happy to have you here with us tonight, Maria.
Well, thank you all for having us. I really do appreciate that, and thank you for the awesome introduction as well. So when I was asked to speak here this evening, I wanted to ask one of my coworkers to join me. She's just been an asset to our tribal team. She's fairly new. She's been around a few weeks now with us, but just the short tenure that she's been with us, she's made a huge difference with regard to participation, at least in the state of Kansas. So I wanted to ask her just to say a few words because she's also a minority, so she understands, just like with Native American people. And I just wanted her to say a few words. So if you would, Coralys, please.
Yes, no, thank you so much for that, Maria. It's been a pleasure working with the tribal team for the past 3 months, I think it's gonna be. Before that, I was working only with Utah, and it's been refreshing to be with the tribal team. Thank you, Denise and Kate, for having us tonight here. It is so important for us at the Census Bureau to let our community know how vital the 2020 census is for our community and how important it is for every single person, even for those that haven't been born yet. So thank you so much for having us tonight.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, we are going to go ahead and just get the ball rolling here. I don't want to take up too much of anybody's time. So initially, when I was asked to do this presentation, like I said, I wanted to be inclusive as possible. So I asked Coralys to attend as well. So first and foremost, thank you for having us and providing this platform to us. I think it's really important that this information is shared to everybody because it's not just one nationality that needs to be counted, right? We all should stand up and be counted. So there's one thing that all census employees are generally say the same thing, right? We need to be counted once, only once, and in the right place. So that's something that is consistent, and I definitely wanted to share that with you as well. So when I was initially asked to do this presentation, I immediately thought of Zan. So Zan is the data engineer here in Kansas, and she's helped me immensely throughout my process being here. So I thought, well, what would trigger my interest, right? So what I did was I said, hey, could you come and come to this presentation with us? Can you disseminate some information on what programs are directly impacted? And she indicated to me that they've already used this platform to do that. So I definitely don't want to be redundant and just repeat what you guys have already heard. So I was able to do some research. I did a Watkins interview with the History Museum of Watkins. It was released this morning at 10 o'clock on their educational series. So this kind of segues from that interview into this. So that was more questions and stuff. So I wanted to kind of go into why it's so important. So obviously, census data determines fund allocations with regard to WIC, SNAP, TANF, emergency assistance. I think it's also important to identify that those same factors may contribute to non-participation. So with regard to American Indian people, we are considered hard to count population. So I feel like that particular factor of not knowing where you're going to get your next meal from, not knowing where you're going to sleep at night contributes to prioritizing a piece of paper and putting that in the mail. So I think it's important that we identify that these programs are so important that we don't allow them to inhibit us for non-participation. So talking about Lawrence, Kansas, I was really honored to be asked to talk about Lawrence. So for me, Lawrence has become my home. I've been here for roughly 10 years now, give or take. So I got my bachelor's here, I got my master's here. And for me, if I ever get lonesome, I can go over to Haskell and go to the wetlands and pray because that's where I've been praying since I was in school. So for me, I have friends, I have family here, and if I get lonely, I can go to Wapala over there because my culture is here. Lawrence is one of the most diverse places in Kansas. You can walk down the street and smell the diversity, the restaurants that you can choose from. You can look up at a light post and see a traditional dancer up there. You know, I've never seen anything quite like it. So Lawrence is quite diverse. And that's kind of why I put this information on the slideshow here, Free State. Right? So Lawrence was actually burned to the ground because they were pushed back. They were pushing back on slavery. Lawrence didn't want to be a part of that. So Lawrence, they targeted, pillaged, and burned Lawrence to the ground. So when Lawrence rebuilt itself, we rebuilt ourselves so that we could facilitate education. We could facilitate inclusion. We could be free and live here, right? That's what Free State's indicative of. So that's what this place inhibits. It inhibits diversity. You can look around, like I said, the restaurants, the places of worship here. I Googled it just to see, and holy crap, there's a lot of different places you can go to when you need to pray. Just like me, I can go to the wetlands and pray, and it's wonderful for me. That's what keeps me here. So aside from being one of the United States' biggest international institutions, Lawrence is also home to the Haskell Indian Nations University, and this is the largest American Indian university in the U.S. So it harbors 14 tribes coming from 13 states. That was directly from administration. And it's important because there are 577 federally recognized Indian tribes right now. So there's 577 responses that can be written onto your census form. So we need to specify exactly where you come from so that your tribal people are not undercut funding, regardless of where you live, right? And it's not just American Indians. We have different types of ethnicities within subcategories. So we need to make sure that we're represented wholeheartedly when we identify ourselves on those forms. So why is it important that Lawrence residents get counted? Because we are a diverse population. I worked at a call center when I was here in Lawrence, the one at the end of town, and I was a trainer. I ended up being one of the trainers, and there was a group of 20 people. Within those 20 people, the youngest was 18 and the oldest was 60. The youngest just finished high school, the oldest had his master's. So that just right there just shows the diversity in one, even at a job. So why is it important to participate in Lawrence? It's because we are diverse here. It's essential that we get funding for the programs for all of the diversity and the families that inhabit Lawrence. So it's also important because of state redistricting. So specifically, we need to make sure that our representation reflects the diversity within Lawrence. That's why it's important that we participate. Not only is it fund allocation, but it also has to do with making sure that we know where everybody representation lies. So I'm going to go ahead and get into the American Indian stuff. So I included this particular video because I currently oversee 18 additional tribes in Oklahoma. I started out as just the Kansas representative, but my boss came to me and asked if I would take over for one of my coworkers that recently departed the Bureau, and she was an excellent worker. And you could just see it in her record. I'm the data entry lead, and I can see her records, and she's really good at what she did. So she left me in an excellent spot. Prior to her leaving, she sent me this video. So when I spoke to the people at the library about what I wanted to present, they suggested a video, and this one was just, I couldn't pass this one up. So I hope you enjoy this. Oh, shit. Goodness. What's going on here?
Oh, there may be an option where you have to share your sound.
Can you guys not hear this?
No, do you have an option to within your screen sharing to share your sound as well?
Let's look once. It just says share computer sound. I sure do. Okay, awesome sauce. Let's go for it then. Cool. And then I'm gonna start back here. And working?
Chopper.
The U.S. Census only happens every 10 years.
No way.
The census impacts nearly $700 billion in federal spending.
More people who take the census means more money for your community.
Yeah.
By taking the census, we're making a difference. For our tribal nations, our states, and our communities. Sloppy.
Accurate counts in the census means more services.
Masa.
Accurate counts in the census means more for education.
Pontain.
Accurate counts in the census means more for infrastructure.
Dedabre.
The information you share in the 2020 census is protected by law.
Got say.
By taking the 2020 census, we are able to reclaim our tribal voices. We are statistically significant.
Pilot.
It's not too late to take the census.
Visit www.2020census.gov.
If you don't respond, a census worker will come to you. Make sure to count everyone living in your household.
Grandparents, parents, brothers, sisters, children, crazy cousins.
Make sure to list your tribe under the race section.
Nook, Sano, Oman.
So I just wanted to share that with you guys. That is something you can take back to your communities if you'd like. I just feel like it would resonate with American Indian communities. So if that's something that you want to show to your grandchildren, your nieces, nephews, whatever, I just thought that was really cute and informative at the same time. So now we're actually going to get to the meat and potatoes here of the presentation. So this part of the presentation, I wanted to show what I show to the tribes and the tribal people that I meet with. So this is a rather generic timeline here. As you can see, 1790. The takeaway I wanted from this particular slide was that American Indian people were allowed to self-identify 1960 to 1970. But it's kind of, if you notice, it's not as thorough as it could be. Excuse me. So I was asked to present for Watkins Museum of History. And like I said, it was kind of brief, short question answer type presentation, but I did a lot of research for that. So I wanted to take the time to present some of that research this evening so that you can see the timeline and directly how it impacts Indian people. So the first Indian census was in 1857, and it actually was here in Kansas. So it was taken in conjunction of an 1854 treaty with the Shawnee Indians. So Kansas still has it had a rich history then, and it continues to have a rich history now. Kansas tribes currently rank among the top 15% in the Denver-Dallas region. So that's really good that the tribes are participating and they are standing up and getting counted. I do have some really good liaisons here. So Kansas is still making history today with regard to Native American people. So 1857, the Shawnee Treaty, that's what we just talked about. 1860, urban Indian inclusion. So this pertains back to the Indians taxed and non-taxed. So they decided they would include people that were off reservation and living with other families. 1870 was the first statistical atlas was released, and then 1880 was a special census. So this particular timeline, I touch on it slightly. So we're just going to go ahead and go into that. So 1860, the census identifies that slaves freed from 1860 to 1870, then 1850 to 1860. And that just kind of is indicative of Lawrence here, right? If Lawrence was burned down to the ground in 1863, this time frame just kind of correlates to the history we were just talking about there. It says in 1870, Census released their first statistical atlases using the 1850 data, and this was considered a watershed moment. So this kind of highlights the House of Representatives, the representation that we need. So that's why it's so important to outline exactly where you're living April 1st so that House of Representatives can be allocated properly. And this timeline here is just indicative of Lawrence, the slavery correlation timeline. I just want to be as inclusive as possible so you can see how things are impacting the way census operated. So in 1880, there was a special census of Indians done. And I wanted to show this particular slide because it shows where these Indians were enumerated at, right? So Washington, Dakota, California. So this was the very first time that Indians that were not taxed could be enumerated. And it's not surprising that it's in these particular territories. So I wanted to put this on the slideshow so that you could kind of just put everything together and kind of see what I'm trying to pick up, what I'm trying to put down, basically. So in 1885, superintendent directive in charge of reservations should submit annually a census of all Indians under their charge. And in 1890, a report on Indians not taxed was released. So this information was important because there were censuses done before. And when they did these censuses, they were not included on there. So they did numerous censuses, and when they asked them to turn them in, it didn't show that there were actually any Indians present. So the reason why the superintendent in charge were required to do that is because there were censuses done prior, and they didn't necessarily enumerate the Indians and show that they were there. So this part is really important. American Indian citizenship. So because this was put on by the League of Women Voters, obviously that's important, right? Citizenship, when we're able to start voting, is 1924. 6 years later, the blood quantum requirement was put on a census form. So I thought that was important to include into this. For American Indian people, obviously we want to know how we're directly impacted. So as we can see, citizenship 24, 6 years later, blood quantum. And then the timeline kind of, there's a huge separation kind of, because in 1940, there isn't very much information on any of that stuff. There's certain time frames the Census Bureau has to abide by, and 72 years is within that time frame. So up until 1960, we were observed. So prior to 1960, American Indians were basically a specimen, and census people would go and observe our households to document how many people were within our households. So in 1980, census actively sought American Indian participation. In 1990 is when the program that I'm representing right now was actually implemented. And it wasn't called the American Indian Alaska Native Program, it was the Tribal Government Program. So it was early on that the census realized that, hey, you know, maybe we need to put something out there to have tribes help us get participation. And that's probably one of the great things that they did, because having this liaison program helped me do my job. The implementation of this program is so important to American Indian people, so that we can realize that, yeah, we need to get counted. You know, it's so important that we participate, that all people, not just Indian people, all people participate in this. And that's kind of a phrase that I've started telling a lot of the people that I talk to, that we oblige by technicalities to fulfill formalities. So right now there isn't a ever ending pool of funds. We have to know what percentage of population exists so that we can get a certain portion of that funding. That's why American Indian participation is so important, because we are wards of the government. So why does census matter? Because we don't want to be undercounted, right? We want to make sure that American Indian people get resources for programs that we need. I go to IHS myself. I get my teeth cleaned at IHS. So for me, I want to make sure that I'm counted. I want to make sure everybody's counted. Honestly, that's why I took this position. So an Oklahoma tribe actually missed out on funding. They had someone come in and do an analysis of the undercount. So some tribes have more than one band. I'm Menominee. I'm enrolled Menominee. We only have one Menominee tribe in the United States. I can write Menominee on there and be fine. Unfortunately, it's not the same way for some other tribes. And we're going to kind of go into that now. So when you're doing your forms, it's important that your head of household is the Native American. So if you're married and you have a multiracial household, both of your names are on the lease, we want to make sure that you're the head of household, so that that entire household is reflected as Native American. So we also want to make sure, and this goes back to the undercount from the other tribe and then missing out on $100,000 or $100 million, is writing your name out. So like I said, I can put Menominee in here and I can be good, right? I'm all good. I don't have to write anything else. I can send it in. But if a Potawatomi puts Potawatomi in here and they send that in, this is going to be considered a generic response. It's going to be collected and they're going to use it, but the funding to that is not going to go to the right tribe, because there's like 11 bands of Potawatomi, I want to say, maybe 12. But that's why it's so important, so that we know where these funds go. So that's exactly what happened to this tribe in Oklahoma. They were just saying, okay, I'm this particular tribe, when there were two of those particular tribes. So we need to make sure it's either going to Oklahoma or it's going to the other state that the tribe goes into. That's why it's so important that we write our names out here. And this is just for people that, if anybody adopts children, or if they have anybody that's under the age of 15 and they're non-native, but they want to do their due diligence as a foster parent and put the child as head of household, you can do that if the child is 15 years or older. That's just for anybody, if anybody has adopted children. And I think it's also important to hit on protection with American Indian people. So in taking this position, I knew employees took an oath, and I know there's statistical safeguards. I know there's firewalls. And I knew that there was federal law, Title 13, right? But for me, I wanted to investigate that. So what, in addition to Title 13, what is it that's going to protect my information as an American Indian woman? So after I read through the entire law, it was the second to the last amendment in that law, Confidential Information Protection and Statistical Efficiency Act of 2002. So that's a mouthful. That's why I write it down all the time. It's hard for me to remember that, honestly. But that amendment, the placing of that amendment, when I found it, I was like, awesome. I highlighted it because that is ultimately what protects our information. So it's going to take an act of Congress for anybody to get anybody's information. And I know personally that on my phone, I have so much personal information on there. I know my portal to my IHS is on there. Census form, if the information on a census form is not as sensitive as anything like an IHS portal. So that's how your information is protected. So in essence, why is it important to participate? I wanted to share this because this is a really good video as well. So this is the National Congress of American Indians, and these guys, they're good people, and I just want you all to have to be able to see this as well. So I hope you enjoy.
It's really important to have a very accurate and very complete count with the census because representation and funding for those areas is usually directly tied to census. So making sure that you participate and are included in that count safeguards your ability to benefit from funding and also be properly represented in Congress.
It means a great deal to our Indian nations for every American Indian Alaska Native to be counted. And census is every 10 years. And if we're not counted today, I don't think people realize what we would lose.
If our communities don't stand up to be counted, we may lose important funding for tribal housing, public safety, transportation, education, and more.
Elder services, youth services. There's just so many things that depend on an accurate count.
Census data is so important to tribal communities and ensuring that we're fully funded and that we're living up to, the United States living up to its trust and true responsibilities to the tribe. If we're talking about healthcare, making sure that our communities are given an adequate amount of funding to fight some of the most devastating health barriers that plague our communities, such as diabetes, tackling behavioral health care, and also tackling the opioid crisis from our children, the next generation of tribal leaders.
I'm going to have a liaison that continues to get people to fill out their paperwork, to get their census in, to encourage people to apply for those census jobs so that everybody can be counted. We can put it on our Facebook page, we can put it on our tribal television station, we can put it on our tribal newsletter, we can post it in our community service areas, and we make sure that everybody knows that it is a critical area that we need to really get our people to participate in so that we aren't left out and those funds that are available for the tribes to come to those people who really need it.
As Vice President of the NCAI Youth Commission, I plan to promote participation in the 2020 census by making sure my people are visible and counted, make sure that people in my communities are aware of all of the resources around us.
My role in promoting the census is encouraging the younger generation to have their families participate as well.
A lot of youth don't really know how they can be involved with this or what even the census entails. And it's as simple as, you can go online and just telling your friends about it, telling family members, and just letting them know how they can be involved.
The 2020 census is easy. You can do it online, over the phone, or by mailing in the form.
We're very comfortable that the data in the 2020 census will be safe. It's only going to be used to tell us a little bit about the population of the tribe and the statistics.
So there's really no reason, even in this day and age of technology, why you can't be involved.
If you need assistance, go to our Facebook page or go to our tribal website. On there, we'll have links or additional information to assist you. If you need any other additional information, please call the Census Bureau. Thank you.
Awesome. So that's pretty much all I have for you all today. So do we have any questions?
Thank you so very much. Yeah, we can take questions in the Q&A section. You should probably see the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We can also take it in the chat. I have a couple of questions, so if anybody wants to jump in before I get started. If not, maybe I will just ask one to get us going. Do you know how much enumeration increased when after 1990, when the tribal government program started? Like, what kind of impact did that creation of that program have?
Unfortunately, some of the records weren't kept. They didn't have a self-response in 1990. It wasn't until 2010, I believe, that it was actually implemented. So last year, I can give you the rate that it increased from last year to this year. So in 2010, one of my tribes was at 33%, and that tribe in 2020 now is at 53%, 52%. So just this year alone, it has doubled from 2010, the rates have doubled. But we have actually inquired about that as well, but we never got a straight answer on how we impacted, honestly.
And it's hard, I know, with the data being kind of protected for 72 years, and there's only so much that we can access, really. But that's amazing. So that's almost doubling the funding for that particular tribe then, right?
Absolutely, yep. Wow. Because and this past year with the COVID money, when that COVID money was released, basically the secretary, the treasurer of the secretary, or the financial person, took the numbers from 2010 and put it in an algorithm. So whatever numbers that they had in 2010 is basically how they allocated funds this year.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, what are some of the questions that you get from tribal leaders when you travel around and are talking to them?
A lot of the questions is just how we want to do it. I know that a lot of people are concerned about like the protection part of it. And I explain that in a slideshow. That's exactly what I tell them. But the second question that we get is how are we going to impact our communities? Because that's something about American Indian people is that just because we're one nationality, there's 577 federally recognized Indian tribes, and there's 577 ways to be American Indian. In my tribe, there's 9,000 Menominee people, and there's 9,000 ways to be Menominee. So there isn't a blanket plan for one tribe or one nation, even with regard to somebody living up in the Northwest versus the Southwest or the Midwest. You know, so there's different needs for each community, and it's important to recognize that with American Indian people.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? Oh, yes, we do. Okay, so how are persons without a standard address, how would they respond?
So there's an option on the form that says that I do not have an address. So that you just click that little button right there, and it'll let you bypass that. But let's go ahead and have Coralys go a little bit into depth about that one, if you would, Coralys.
Sorry about that. Yes, so if you don't have a city-style address, which is how we call them at the Bureau, let's say 123 Gold Street, Clearfield, Utah, 84113. If you don't have a city-style address like that, then the Census Bureau sends out a census employee to that household to deliver a questionnaire. And when you get that questionnaire delivered, like all the questionnaires that also have been sent to city-style addresses, there is a census ID on that form that you need to use in order to answer the questionnaire. What we are doing with that is using that location and just pinning that location to that household. For example, in Indian country, majority of the households there don't have a city style addresses. It's mostly a description of the area and sometimes even using a landmark. We can also use P.O. boxes as an example for in areas that we have resort communities or areas that they decided to use a P.O. box. Those are not city style addresses, and that is why it is vital for that household to use the census ID so that we at the Census Bureau can just put them together and know that that P.O. box corresponds to this location. If a person answers the census without doing that, without using the census ID, a census taker is gonna go to their homes because that address and that location, they need to be matched. So that is why it is so important to use the census ID to answer the questionnaire.
Thank you. So really, you're also creating just a more accurate map of the locations of homes, not just the people in them, but kind of the whole view of the community. That's really neat.
Definitely, and like Maria was talking about how in Indian country different tribes get funding, it is the same for cities. For example, Utah, which is where I am located right now, it's very rural. So in rural areas, we usually have P.O. boxes, and we need to know that in that rural county, we need to know how many people are living there because they're going to need health services, they're going to need sewer and water services, they're going to need any kind of government assistance program, maybe SNAP, CHIP, Medicaid, Medicare, health clinics. Businesses use census data to know where they should locate different franchises or branches of their offices. So for rural areas and remote areas, it is very important that we do that because then we know, okay, in this county, there's really, there are actually 2,000 people living versus the number of houses that we have enumerated. And it goes back to that issue that Maria was mentioning about funding. It is vital for our communities to get the fair share of federal funds so that their community can flourish.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any other audience questions? I think you all did such a thorough job that there are no questions because all of them were answered already. Well, is there any other kind of anecdotes or any? Oh, actually, we got one. Okay, so Maria, you mentioned the blood quantum. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So blood quantum is what tribal people are required to have in order to be considered a member of their tribe. So depending on what tribe you come from determines how much of the blood quantum you're required to have. So some tribes don't require that you have a blood quantum and you can just join on lineage. My tribe, you have to be 1/4 Menominee. So I'm 99 1/28 Menominee. That's equivalent to over 3/4. So that's the only tribe I am. So once that was implemented, obviously somebody in my family at one point was a full blood. I am not a full blood anymore, and that was documented starting in 1930. I hope that answers your question.
And so what do you do if you are enrolled in multiple tribes?
Good question. Very good question. You put all of those tribes on the form. So one thing that we talked about in the presentation at Watkins is that you have the capacity to put all multiple tribes on there. And on the online form, there's 200 characters.
Okay.
So you can fill in your tribes up to 200 characters on a regular form because of the online form. So even if you have to turn your form sideways and write your tribes up the side, you have the capacity to do that. And Census isn't going to say, hey, show me your enrollment card, because that is not something they do either.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. And just to like a very technical question, do you just put like a comma between them?
I would, yes.
Okay. Just making sure. The whole having to have it down exactly so that you make sure that that particular band is counted is so crucial. And so you just want to make sure that everyone is doing it exactly correct. That way every single dollar is going where it's supposed to go. So
Absolutely, and that's kind of just, I suppose, just to piggyback off that, that's a question that I had tribal leaders ask me. What is our federal name? How are we federally recognized? And that's important that you know that, so that when you do go to fill out your form, that you know which option to choose.
that's really neat. Okay. Any other questions or any anecdotes or stories or anything that you or Coralys want to mention before we go?
No, I think I said pretty much everything that I'd like to say. But I do appreciate your time here, and I appreciate working with the community. I really love Lawrence, so thank you all for inviting me to talk about it here this evening.
We're so lucky to have you. Thank you. I'm glad that you never left. All right. Thank you both. And if you have other questions, you can go ahead and message the Lawrence Public Library or the League of Women Voters. And if there's specific questions from Maria or Coralys that you don't get to answer, or you thought of it in the middle of the night like I like to do, we can pass those along and get those answered. I did want to point out that the deadline for the census has been moved. It was moved back for COVID and then now been moved up by current administration to be September 30th. So there is even less time to make sure you get counted. So I want everybody who's watching this to share all of your details and all of your new information to every single person you know and get everybody counted.
Yes.
Yes.
And Kansas just hit 91% this morning. So
Really?
our coordinator told us that we're like top 2 or top 3. So Kansas is killing it.
Yes, Kansas is always like in our region, they're number 1, which makes me really jealous because Utah is usually between the 8th and the 12th position. And I just wanted to mention that regardless of where you're from, how old you are, who you love, your housing situation, it is vital to answer the 2020 census. This means money for our communities. Everybody wants to have a healthy community. Everybody wants to have a entertaining community. Everybody wants to have a peaceful community where everybody can join in and be together in the parks, good housing, affordable housing. And the only way that we can have that is when we stand up and we say, my household is composed of 5 Puerto Ricans that are living on Hill Air Force Base in Utah, and they are between the ages of 4 and 35 years old, because that's when we will get the services our community needs: child care, food on the table. If we really look at the census, it's really about basic human rights. It's about the food that a family will put on their table. It's about the roof that a family needs. It's about the health care that everybody needs to live a decent and respectable life. It is not a political issue. It is a community issue. It is a human rights issue. And we want everybody to just go online, call us, or send that census form by mail. It only takes 10 minutes or less, and it's for the next 10 years. So I just wanted to let everybody know about that, and just call your neighbors, call your friend, and just tell them, hey, I can even help you to do the census. It's in 13 different languages online. You have assistance for 59 languages, and it's for the betterment of our community. So I just want to leave that out there. And thank you so much for doing this for our community. Education is key in order to have a great and civilized community. And it is by trusted voices like yours that we can actually get this message out there and educate the community about how vital it is, and then educate our American Indian and Alaska Native community about how crucial this is for them.
That is a wonderful way to leave it. Thank you so very much. I love listening to you both speak in your passion, and I am just so thrilled to know you both. So thank you. And again, if anybody has any questions, you can contact the library or the League of Women Voters. We're happy to pass it along. If you want to just brag that you already did your census, go ahead and send us that too. We are thrilled, and I hope you all have a really wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.